What's going on, everybody? It's Roarwaijo coming at you with a brand new video, and guys, we are about to enter one of the most interesting and potentially obnoxious formats in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! History. For those of you that are unaware, we just finished up YCS Minneapolis a few days as of recording this, and then also we got the set release of Darkwing Blast, which released a bunch of things into the game, including new support for both Sprite and Tier Limit, as well as giving us the Bestial archetype. So not only have these cards, changed the game a little bit, but we're about to, as we enter November, receive Magnificent Mavens, aka our holiday box, aka the OCG's secret shiny box. So this is bringing with it a whole host of new cards. We are getting some new Sky Striker support, we're getting some new Witchcrafter support, some new Mayakashi support. However, due to the breakup of the Earth Duelist pack, Duelist of Pyroxene, which we were supposed to get like the OCG did, we're actually getting the Ishizu cards, and by that I mean the cards that were used by Ishizu in the anime, or at least like retrains of them, something like that. And basically, the Ishizu cards spell a very dark time for Yu-Gi-Oh! Taking not only what is currently the best deck and making it significantly higher to reach, but also just providing a very obnoxious game state and taking some smaller decks and making them come up a little bit as well. If you aren't new to my channel and my tier list, then you'll know that there's definitely something a bit different about my tier list. Usually I have tier 1, tier 1.5, tier 2, and Rogue. Well, honestly, I feel like there are so few decks that can see consistent success, super consistent success, at least one top every other event, basically. I feel like there is just so much, and the bar to entry is just so high for this format between the Bestials and the Ishizu cards and everything, that there is actually a lot less decks than should be able to in the format. And so I'm only going to have, I believe this is 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, there's 16 different decks here, and some of them are even a bit of a stretch just because I felt like it. So I feel like there's really, it's going to be a bit more of a limited format than, say, the Despia Sword Soul format earlier this year. And while that is a bit unfortunate, it'll make this video go a lot faster. Speaking of which, though, I'm definitely not going to waste any more time here. Let's go ahead and get right into this, starting off with meta changing. So meta changing is reserved basically just for tier limit. Ishizu tier is quite possibly going to be one of the most broken decks in the game. I'm usually not one of those martyrs that's just oh my god, this is gonna be tier 0, the OCG, it was super broken, it's gonna be super broken over here. No, this deck is actually just absurd. The amount of advantage you get from even just a single normal summon, even by gambling, as long as you mill one thing, you're usually fine enough to completely obliterate your opponent. You're milling 10 cards from your deck, you're milling 10 cards from your opponent deck, you're setting up Gravekeeper's Trap, which is getting you more searches, and if you're playing Exchange of the Spirit, it's an Abyss Dweller / Necro Valley. You're setting up Roll Kalos, Kaleido Heart, Kit Kalos, Solyet, Crime, Meta Noise. Actually, I just got done doing some Reptilian games for my Sleeper Sunday that's going to be happening this month, which you should totally tune in for. Sorry I'm stuttering a bit, I'm talking super fast. But one of them was against our friend from Twitter, Diamond Dude, and he was playing Ishizu tier, and he literally had, one thing for everything I had, plus, 12. This deck is so broken. I really hope that we get another list by, the very end of the year. I hope we get that Christmas list, honestly, because that would be a great gift, as long as it does something to Ishizu tier before we have to rely on the Castura support to, carry the format. That's also going to be a very unfun threat to deal with. But, I mean, hey, at least that dies to Dark Ruler. But, yeah, Ishizu tier is quite possibly one of the most absurd decks we've ever seen in the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, and I'm dreading this format. That's why I'm playing Fluendaries, guys. So next up, we have Branded Despia, specifically Branded Despia, because I feel like that's arguably the best build of Branded. I did hype up Branded Predaplant a little bit, but it's a bit less, consistent, I guess, and this is also the better one at going for the Branded Expulsion plays, and because of the Branded Expulsion plays, I do want to put it in tier 2. I feel like it's a really strong engine. You can actually main deck it pretty confidently, and of course that uses, Ra's Disciple, Edo, and then the Artifact Scythe. You can use any of those and your Branded Expulsion to basically give you just a free win most of the time, unless they have something like Droplet or Dark Hole. They're not going to be able to out their own Edo or Ra's Disciple, and if you Artifact Scythe them, they better have the out, I think Branded Despia is also just fine overall. I feel like one of the biggest problems for the deck is probably a combination of the Bestials and the Ishizu, which is obviously one of the biggest problems in the format, but you have your Ishizu stuff milling all of your Fallen of Albaz and stuff. That could be annoying for your Branded Fusion plays, and then you also have the Bestials that can banish things from grave, but fun fact, guys, this deck can also play Bestials, so Honestly, a lot of these are based off the fact if they can either play against or with the Bestial or Ishizu cards, which is why some of these picks may look a little bit jank. But yeah, this deck can actually make some pretty good use of the Bestials, being able to use this stuff like Branded Beast, while also just having a good Bestial package from when your opponent goes first, which is really good against the tier limit Ishizu threat. And overall, I think while it definitely isn't going to be as great, especially with the Bestials hitting your Branded in red and Branded Exile targets, that's very painful. But I think the deck is definitely serviceable if you're already playing it. Next up, we have Sword Soul, and I'm going to put Sword Soul probably below Branded Despia. It's actually kind of weird considering I used to almost always have this deck above Branded Despia when there were just the two that were duking at it in that one format. But yeah, Sword Soul, so it's got a lot of power behind it in terms of like the changing and stuff. Going second, it can break boards and stuff pretty well. But if you're going second, you're not only going to have to deal with the Ishizu stuff, like thinning all of your things, like especially stuff like your Taya is very frustrating. And yeah, while you are getting your Tenyis in grave, you know, like your Ashuna and your Vishuda and everything, you know, that sounds really good on paper until your opponent starts revealing Bestial monsters and hitting your Ashuna and your Vishuda before you can even use them from your graveyard. Combine this with Runic still running around and thinning down your already, like, very dangerously thin resources, especially with your Taya again, and you're probably going to struggle a little bit against some other decks, especially because I've noticed that hand traps are becoming a little bit more prominent into the format. So basically, if they open Imperm for your Moe and you don't have Heavenly Dragon Circle, then I'm sorry, just scoop at that point. I love Sword Soul. I was actually playing it until very recently, but I just feel like going into this format, it's probably one like, it's not terrible, especially if it does go off and you can go first and your opponent doesn't have anything. But overall, I feel like you could just play something else. Next up, we have Rytron, and Rytron's a bit of an interesting case because against the Ishizu stuff, it couldn't be happier. Like, if your opponent's only using Ishizu cards, they're going to be dumping all of your names in grave, which is making basically your hand a lot more consistent than it already was, especially if you already open like a bunch of Ben 10s and stuff. Not to mention that with Board Breaker slowly drifting out of the format from the looks of it, the Vanities Ruler is going to be a lot harder to out. And I mean, if you can Vanities Ruler, then you kind of just have a game there, honestly, if they don't have an out. Not to mention things like the turn skip Rytron builds, or even just builds playing Amber Factor Pain in general, are going to have an innate advantage against decks that, like Tier Limit, that use fusion monsters. But the problem comes when you acknowledge that a lot of the Ishizu builds of Tier are also on Bestial cards, and then you got, you know, Branded Despia on Bestial, you got Dragon Link on Bestial, you got a lot of decks on Bestial cards. And it becomes a bit of a struggle when you're activating Alpha or Zeta in grave, and then your opponent, like, shotguns a Druisworm or a Magnemite, and you, like, want to die. So, I'll put it... I'm gonna be nice. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of Tier 2, because it's a lot more common probably to see the Ishizu stuff, or for the Ishizu stuff to benefit you more than your Bestial, more than the opponent having Bestial stuff to, like, negatively impact you, sorry. And so I'm gonna be a little bit nice too. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of Tier 2, mainly just because of what it can do and how it interacts with the Ishizu cards, though the Bestial stuff does put a little bit of a hamper on it. Next up, we have Eldritch, and this is actually almost an exact same story as Rytron. You know, you love getting your stuff milled to the graveyard, but the Bestial stuff hurts you really bad. But the thing is, compared to Rytron, is that Eldritch gets hurt by the Bestials way, way worse. Like, so I'm going to put it in everything else, and with my luck, you know, a build's going to top, and then someone's going to come into my comments and be like, you messed up, idiot. But it's probably going to be because they're playing, like, 12 Floodgates. But Eldritch as a whole is going to struggle, especially the branded builds. They're going to struggle against the Bestial cards because it's different when you have, like, Alpha, Zeta, Gamma, and Delta in your grave, right? And then they Bestial, like, one of them away. You still have 3 names, right? Well, if you have a Golden Lord in grave and you're trying to activate its effect to get it back and you send something, or if you dump it off, like, the branded fusion or something, and then they reveal a Bestial and then they hit your Golden Lord, then you're in a really bad spot because they do not have a way to recur their banished Golden Lords. You can recur from the grave, you can recur from the hand, you can recur from the deck, but you cannot get it out of your banish zone, which is a really big problem, especially if they end up hitting both of them. So yeah, again, Eldritch is probably going to see something with, like, a bunch of, like, random Floodgates in there, or some spicy tech card that's going to be specifically designed to be anti-meta, but I'm going to put it in the everything else category, which doesn't mean it's a bad deck. It means it's just one of the, like, if you have it, play it, and you don't have anything else, but it's one of the ones, it's like Rogue, basically. This is the equivalent of Rogue, and we might see here and there. Also, I neglected to realize that we actually have Keldo in Mudora, so I think I'm actually going to bump Rytron down to here, because I was like, yeah, it works really well with the Ishizu cards, and then I keep forgetting that Keldo and Mudora exist, which are going to shuffle up to 3 or 5 as quick effects each from the graveyard, so Rytron's getting bumped down to everything else. So next up, we have Invoked, and, I'm gonna have to put Invoked in the everything else category. So the thing is with Invoked is that it works really well with other Fusion Good Stuff decks right now. You know, it works well with Tier, works well with a lot of the branded stuff. But the big problem is that, yeah, they're gonna mill your stuff off the Ishizu cards, and you know, you can get your Alistair engraved. If you activate Invocation and they Bestial your Alistair or whatever, you can actually Invocation add the Alistair back and then shuffle back the Invocation, which is pretty good. But with the Keldo in Mudora and like all the Ishizu stuff, being able to shuffle your stuff back as well, you could be in a pretty bad spot. Granted, if you are playing, you know, Invoked, you're probably also playing some tier limit cards or something like that. So it will benefit you to get your stuff milled a little bit, but having it shuffled back or getting banished is just going to be a frequent nuisance, and you could end up losing both your Invocations and then like keep drawing into Alistairs, and they're not going to like help you with that. Next up, we have Fluanderies, and this is going to be the first deck I'm putting in the tier 1 category. So Flunder is basically good for a few reasons. You know, you got easy 1 to 1.5 card combos that you can easily search off of the Duality and the Prosperity. You also have access to main deck Dimension Shifter, which is going to be very crucial. They do not care about the Bestial cards. They really don't care much about Mudora and Keldo either. They don't really care about getting their stuff milled either too much, because they can just banish it and then Toucan add it back, if they're not under Dimension Shifter, of course. And Barrier Statue and Ryza are still very strong cards. Using Ryza on your opponent's turn is still incredibly strong to hit tier cards out of the grave, or just cards in general out of the graveyard. The biggest problem with Flunder probably lies in that either you have combo or you have absolutely nothing, but you can actually circumvent that a little bit by playing some consistency engines. You can use the Dogmatica package to function well with the Garura and everything for free draws, turn a Deer into engage. It also gives you some going second board breaking with the Natus and everything, and you get to normal summon Ecclesia off your M-Pin, which I find so funny to add your punishment. You can also, if you want to not only avoid Ash and stuff, but also get an additional normal summon for extension and summoning for one less tribute, you can play the Samorg package with the Samorg Bird of Perfection, as well as the Field Spell. That's also a pretty good package that I'm considering testing now. I think there's a few packages that you can play in Flunder to make it a little bit more resilient or a little bit more consistent, and so I'm probably going to experiment with some myself, because again, I am on Flunder right now. I feel like it's just one of the only decks I can play right now that'll actually be really good. So yeah, Flunder is going to be the first deck in the tier 1 category. So sorry about that like little interlude real quick. I kind of just forgot to put Sprite in there when I remade the tier list, because I had to add a little bit of things. But yeah, Sprite just wasn't there, sorry about that. But I'm going to be putting Sprite in the tier 1 category as well. I'm probably going to put it, above or below Flunder, because it's a lot more consistent than Flunder, ironically, given that Flunder has 1-card combos, but because you can kind of turn like any hand into something with Sprite, I'm going to put it above Flunder. I feel like Sprite, specifically Runic Sprite, out of all of them, is probably the one that's going to be able to handle the Ishizu cards the best, because you can rip some of them off the top with the Runic cards, especially when you get to go first, obviously. And you just have so much diversity in your interruptions. You know, you have basically an archetypal Imperm, you have a Pop, you have a back row Pop, which is good for like the Field Spell for tier, and the entire time you're going to be ripping a bunch of cards off the top of your opponent's deck. And then not to mention you have the Sprite cards themselves, which are incredibly consistent and versatile, giving you not only a bunch of consistent ways to like draw, or, you know, get pops off the Soul Scissors, you know, but mainly the biggest one is getting like the Ibli lock as well. On top of having your negates with Red and Carrot, I feel like Sprite is definitely a bit too much of like, it's too much of a leech to like die just yet, just from Ishizu cards being added to the format. Do I think that tier is going to see an overwhelmingly higher amount of representation and top cut success now? Absolutely, but I think Sprite is definitely going to be like one of those, like, probably the second most represented decks, if not Flunder. So yeah, Sprite is going to be going into the tier 1 category. Next up, we have Exo Sisters, and as weird as it feels to say it, nah, I don't want to be that generous. I'm going to be putting Exo Sister at the very top of tier 2. I don't want to put it at like tier 1 or anything like that. I feel like it doesn't deserve it just quite, and I'll explain why in a second. So Exo Sister has one good thing going for it. It is incredibly strong against the tier matchup. However, there are a few factors that make me unable to put it higher than tier 2. So, Super Poly is a card, and so is Garura. Very sad. Like, super fucking sad. And outside of the tier matchup, it is kind of terrible. Like, you know, you'd think that playing Necro Valley and Shifter and everything in the deck would be, like, super powerful against a bunch of decks, but you know, I can play Sword Soul and completely clap up Exo Sister and almost never lose an actual game because a lot of other decks just don't care about those cards. And even if they do care about those cards, the thing is that the Exo Sister engine itself just isn't very strong unless you're going against tier specifically. Like, yeah, you know, they have an archetypal Necro Valley, archetypal Abyss Dweller, you know, they can banish things, but if your opponent isn't playing a deck like Tier that's like super heavily focused on the grave, especially when it comes to like the Ishizu cards and everything, then yeah, the Exo Sister cards themselves just aren't very strong, especially because you kind of have to play only Exo Sisters now with Martha locking you out of everything else. So I'm going to put it in Tier 2 because it'll probably see a good amount of top cut success like Flunder because it is very good anti-meta choice for like Tier Limit specifically. But other than that, I feel like it's a bit lackluster, and you probably won't see as many tops as you may think because it's going to get knocked down at the lower brackets. Next up, we have Tri-Brigade variants, and I'm going to put this at the top of everything else. So I put this in here, so it's in everything else, right? But I put it in here because it actually has an incredibly strong tier matchup, particularly Bird Up. So one of the best things about Bird Up is that with Recital Starling and Cobalt Sparrow, you can search DD Crow. And not only can you search DD Crow, but your end boards are really easily able to consist of, let's see. So you have your Appaloosa, which is pretty good against tier if they're not chain blocking, or even if they are chain blocking, you can hit a few things. Hit like a Sheeran in hand, stuff like that. You have your double Dragon Lords. You can bounce the field spell. You can bounce other problem cards. You can bounce like Scream. You have your Revolt. That's amazing follow-up right there. Gets back your banished resources, which is really good against Runic, by the way. If you actually have enough resources, instead of going for a double Dragon Lords, you can actually go for a Hrisbelger, which is a really good card against tier. If you don't know what it does, it's a quick effect, shuffle a monster from your opponent's grave into the deck, and then if your opponent has no monsters in grave, it gains 2400 attack, which puts it at 4800. And it's super easy to bring out because even if you don't make it using your Tri-Brigades, it just requires 2 or more wind monsters, and it's a link 3. But the main part about the Bird Up and a lot of Tri-Brigade end boards is that you have Herald of the Arclight. So Herald of the Arclight is super stupid strong against tier specifically because every monster sent from the hand or main deck to the graveyard is banished instead. And while Dark Ruler is not seeing as much play as it was, Forbidden Droplet is actually seeing a lot of play, and Arclight actually shuts off Droplet from using monsters. Like, your opponent has to use back row. Not to mention that Tri-Brigade, of course, really does not care about the Bestial cards or anything, and with the Ishizu cards milling their stuff, you know, you can trigger your Kit, you can trigger your Nerval, you can get a bunch of stuff off of that. You can even get things dumped into grave that you can summon off of Turquoise Warbler later. Honestly, I feel like Tri-Brigade isn't gonna do awful. The funniest tech choice you can actually do off the Ishizu cards is play a single copy of Neko Main King. So Neko Main King is actually a card that people are talking about for like Danger Dark World, because if your opponent is on the Dark World stuff, they use their Grapha, they can discard a Neko Main King and skip your turn. Well, that also triggers if the Ishizu cards send it. So basically, you're just gonna immediately skip your opponent's turn if they end up milling the Neko Main King on their turn. It is really funny, and it's a tech choice you could play because it is a beast. But yeah, so I think Tri-Brigade isn't in the worst spot. I think it's mainly just a bit too slow in the modern game, especially when it comes to a bunch of hand traps. But I do feel like it has its place in the format, especially if it can go first and get its end board non-interrupted. Next up, we have Virtual World, and I actually put this in here to be kind of nice to Virtual World players. I was actually considering removing this from the last tier list, but I'm going to put it in everything else, probably under Eldritch. So the thing is with the Virtual World is that they're going to be milling your deck a lot. Well, not only do you not care about the Bestial stuff, by the way, but they're going to be milling your deck a lot, which will let you use your trap cards like Chu-Chi and your Kowloon and your spell card Qinglong a lot better. And honestly, that's kind of the best thing I have going for it, except for the fact that Shen Shen is also a pretty good card against tier limit, because, you know, if they try to send their Kit Kalos, they're going to end up banishing it. Anything sent from the field, which includes their Kaleido Heart, actually, which is really good with your Chu-Chi, it's going to get banished, so it's going to be really good for Shen Shen specifically. So yeah, it definitely has its place as well. I feel like a really skilled and dedicated Virtual World pilot can probably do some damage, especially against a very heavily tier populated meta. But otherwise, I don't think it's going to do too great. I just wanted to be really nice because I thought it had some sort of application here. Next up, we have Math Mech, and I'm going to put Math Mech above Sword Soul, but below Branded Despia. So this is actually kind of a fall from grace here, because Math Mech was actually the only other deck in the tier 1 category in our last list, other than Sprite and Tier. But the biggest problem with Math Mech is the Bestial engine, and of course, you know, the Mudora and the Keldo. But really, the Bestial engine is just very frustrating for the deck because, you know, you can circular, dump your Sigma for cost. they chain a Bestial monster and you're in a pretty bad spot. I'm gonna say that Mathmech isn't like going to completely die off because of this. I feel like maybe it'll lose a lot of representation, which could make it seem that way, but I think Mathmech as a deck is still kind of fine, honestly. So the Bestial cards are annoying, especially if your opponent's playing like tier Bestial, Ashizu, stuff like that. But you still have other cards in your hand, you know? It's not just going to be like Mathmech Circular and like 4 hand traps in your hand, and if that is the case, that's kind of crazy, but yeah, like there's not only like the pure Mathmech builds that has extension anyway with like some of your other Mathmech cards and your other Cyberus cards like Parallel Exceed, but like you also have like, you know, the Adignister builds, you have the Salamangreat builds, all of these builds that can actually utilize the hand as well as the graveyard resources, and that can give you a few more applications in your extra deck. Remember, Tier has a very hard time outing Avermax if they can out it at all. Let me know in the comments actually, what is the out to Avermax? But not only that, but while the Bestial cards are a problem, consider the fact that Mathmech is already a deck that plays a huge amount of hand traps due to Heat Soul and due to being able to use 1-card combos, so that means Ghost Bell is almost kind of a given in the main deck anyway. So if you have Ghost Bell and your opponent has a Bestial, you just like make him your bitch, like who cares? I think Mathmech isn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon for the dedicated players. I feel like some people are going to be dropping it, but I do think it's going to be able to steal a top slot or 2 here and there. Next up, we have Punk builds. I was kind of nice to Punk builds here because I feel like they do have some applications themselves. You know, with their stuff getting milled, they don't really mind too much, especially if they're on the Therian build, they can actually just equip the Therians from the grave. I'm going to still put it in everything else, probably below Rytron, maybe. The problem with Punk is that it just doesn't do enough anymore. Without the Hulk or the Chaos Ruler and everything, you kind of just don't really have any good starters. But if you combine it with other things in your hand, you don't really need a E-Telly to be a 1-card combo anymore. You can just work with the other cards in your hand, be like 2-card combos, 2.5-card combos, stuff like that. You also have the Adventure Engine, which is still really strong. If your opponent mills like your Water Enchantress, that's really good. And while Punk definitely has taken a huge fall from grace, especially from the Forbidden and Limited list, I feel like it can at least still do something, especially if it is playing the Adventure package this format. Next up, we have Dragon Link, and I'm going to put Dragon Link below Flu in Tier 1. No, I'll put it above Flu in Tier 1. I feel like Dragon Link is incredibly strong right now, so basically, Dragon Link is able to play, like, hella Bestial cards, including the main package with, like, the Lubellians and the Branded Beast and everything, on top of having 1-card combos and 1.5-card combos off a Starlight Safer in Chaos Space for really strong end boards that can consist of, like, Branded Beast, Spheres, Savage, Boral End, stuff like that off of just, like, a couple of cards. It is really, really strong. The biggest problem with the Dragon Link strategy right now, or at least of the upcoming format, is definitely going to be Super Poly, because Super Poly hitting Boral End and Savage is an absolute nightmare. Seriously, why did Konami print Garura? That was such a terrible idea. But I think because it's super strong at playing the Bestial cards, arguably the best deck to utilize them, because it does synergize with the Magnemite. You literally can access full combo just from your opponent using a Lighter Dark and Grave, as well as just having access to like super strong end boards. I feel like Dragon Link, it would be a crime to not put it in the Tier 1 category. So next up we have Sky Striker. I was actually pretty nice in leaving Sky Striker here because I considered the fact that with the Ashizu cards, you know, dumping things, even with Keldo and Mudora being able to shuffle back your Kagari targets, you're still gonna be able to get a bunch of spells engraved for, you know, your Afterburners, your Widow Anchor, your Engage, of course, and it can also pitch, like, you know, the Metal Foes Fusion, which is kind of a brick. Granted, it's gonna be a lot harder to play the Fusion Destiny package with these Shizu stuff. I feel like it's just something you can drop in general, especially considering that they just got Linkage, which basically allows them to just send a card they control to special a Sky Striker from their extra deck, if I recall correctly. So not only will that trigger your Sky Striker effects, you know, like your Kagari, your Shizuku will work during the end phase, Hayate and stuff during the battle phase. All of that stuff will be live, but it also really helps when you don't have access to Ray or Rose, or if your opponent banishes your Rays and Roses from your graveyard using the Bestial monsters. So I'm actually going to put Sky Striker at the bottom of Tier 2 for those reasons. I feel like it's definitely going to be something that sees play, especially with Mystic Mind still at 3. I feel like that's going to be a very popular card right now in this format. But as much as I hate Sky Striker, I have to admit, with Linkage, it is pretty damn fire. And it also has the archetypal Hump now as well. It has a Laren too, but no one cares about a Laren. But I feel like the deck is definitely going to be something you can see popping up here and there. Next up is Marincess. I was being very generous putting Marincess here, but I'll put it above Rytron. So Marincess has a few things going for it. So not only is it a deck that can play a bunch of hand traps, of course, you know, having the 1 and 1.5 card combos, 2 card combos, you can just play a bunch of hand traps. Admittedly, not as good as the other Cybers decks because you don't have access to Heat Soul, but it's still pretty damn good. A lot of decks have a hard time outing a towers, especially when your towers comes attached to like 2 imperms. Obviously, they really could not care less about the Bestial cards. The Ishizu cards milling their things is actually pretty damn good because they get a lot of follow-up on their turn from the stuff in the grave. Granted, assuming they don't, you know, Keldo and Mudora all of it back, but it is still pretty nice. Plus, even if they do Keldo and Mudora it back, you know, they're just milling a bunch of hand traps, it's going to thin your deck out a little bit. But there's also a few more things. So, from the 2022 Megatins, we actually got Link into the Vrains, which is a pretty good card overall, but it really shines in a deck like Marincess. Probably not as much as like Adignister, but in Marincess, it is very strong, because a lot of the problem with Marincess happens when, like, say you normal summon your Blue Tang and you get Ghost Ogred. You have like literally no other extenders in hand, you're absolutely screwed. What do? Well, instead of normal summoning the Blue Tang, you can activate Link into the Vrains, summon the Blue Tang from your hand, and then go immediately into like your Sea Angel or your Blue Slug. Not only is this going to protect your Blue Tang from being hit with the Ghost Ogre or anything like that, especially when going second, prevents interruptions in that form, but also your opponent cannot respond to the summon or activate effects on summon, much like Magical Meltdown, Branded Lost, stuff like that. So basically, you're not only avoiding things by using the Link into the Vrains, but you're also getting both the effect of whatever you use as material and whatever you Link summoned, and your opponent really can't do anything about it. So it's really good for being able to play through Disruption, especially hand traps, and it'll help the deck significantly, especially with your Sea Angel, because it is so crucial to get her out most of the time. Not only that, but we actually just out of Darkwing Blast got World Ocean Dragon Zealantis. I don't remember if that's still his name. I know it's still like Zealantis, but I don't know if it's the exact name of him anymore. But this card kind of got like super hyped as being super busted for like maybe a couple days, and then everyone just completely forgot about it. So for those of you that don't remember, World Ocean Dragon Zealantis is a Link 4 water dragon, I believe. Maybe it's a worm, or no, it's a sea serpent. It's a sea serpent. It has 2500 attack, and it requires a 1 or more effect monster, meaning you can take any Link 4 from your field and just swap it out for the Zealantis, basically. It says that, I'm pretty sure it has an effect that says you can banish as many monsters on the field as possible, then special summon all of the, or as many monsters that were banished by this effect as possible back to their fields and either face up attack or face down defense. So it's honestly a lot better for other decks than it is for Marincess, granted. But it is pretty nice to put things back in defense and to rearrange your Link arrows as you see fit. But the biggest benefit from this card for Marincess is the fact that this deck cannot use access code like the other Cybers decks, you know, because other Cybers decks make like a super huge access code or a double swinging access code. Well, this deck can't do that because they're locked into water. So basically, Zealantis says during the battle phase, quick effect, you can non-target destroy cards on the field, I believe. I think it's just on the field, not just your opponent controls, up to the number of co-linked monsters on the field. So you can easily get like 2 or 3 pops, which is pretty nice in a deck that suffers from going second and using removal. I don't think either of these cards are going to like shotgun Marincess like super high up. That's why I'm keeping it in the everything else category. But I feel like it's a bit slept on this format, and it has received a bunch of indirect buffs that a lot of people aren't really like known to. Finally, we have Naturia, Ishizu, Vernasilf, technically Castor if you count Fenrir. So this is a really fun deck. Okay, so I actually played against it on stream earlier today. If you guys were here for my Reptilian stream, I do have the full unedited VOD up on the channel. I believe there was 2 games, and this deck, I actually have my own build too. It's so much fun. It's so funny. So basically, you utilize the Ishizu cards to mill a bunch of things in your graveyard, and then you use your new Naturia cards, being the Mole Cricket, the Camellia, and the Blessing, I think it's called now, not Spring Breeze. And you use all of those to fuel a massive end board of like 3 monster negates. You have like your Ishizu cards milling a bunch of things. You have all of your Ishizu stuff engraved, like your Mudora and your Keldo. You have your Castor Fenrir if you need that on your end board. You have a bunch of like other things that you can go into. You can make like Nap Beast. You can make I mean, I guess you can make Landois and stuff too, but the main thing being your main deck monsters like your Sunflower, giving you a bunch of negates. And it is a lot of negates because Naturia Camellia reads like a custom card. On summon from anywhere, you can dump a Sacred Tree from your deck, essentially. It says any Naturia card, but you're gonna dump Sacred Tree. Sacred Tree is a mandatory add from deck to hand. You can add your Blessing. Blessing revives anything from your grave or summons from your hand, or it synchro summons whenever you feel like it's a quick play. And it gives you access to your Naturia Mole Cricket. And the cool thing about Naturia Camellia is that it says if your Naturia were to tribute a monster to activate its effect, I believe, you can just mill 2 instead. You know what cards trigger when they're milled from the deck? Granted, that is a hard once per turn. It would be absolutely broken otherwise, but it is really strong for taking cards like Sunflower and, you know, taking it from 1 use to 2 uses. And then Naturia, of course, has other different things you can do. Of course, not only the Nat Beast and everything, but you also have Naturia Rose Whip, which says that your opponent can only activate 1 spell and trap per turn, which is very scary. You have, I believe, whatever, like, the Vein Leaf one is, I think that one negates spells and traps, or negates, like, spells or something. You have the Leaf Bug, or Stink Bug, or something, that says that your opponent, you can, like, negate an attack from your opponent, which is not too great, but it is pretty strong. And while it isn't a negate, Naturia Mole Cricket is really, really strong. He's the one that's actually depicted right here. I believe he says, quick effect, you contribute this card to summon a Naturia from your deck, or 2 if your opponent has the highest attack monster on board. Keep in mind he is 0/0. And then also has the effect, if you or your opponent summon from the extra deck, you specifically, I believe, being a Naturia, then you can special summon it from your grave. So basically, what you can do is, Camellia is a level 4 tuner, so Camellia dumps this. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Camellia says when your opponent special summons, you can summon a Naturia from your hand or grave, I believe. Maybe it's just grave. So like, you summon your Mole Cricket off of your, like, blessing or something that you got off your Camellia. You use your Camellia and your Mole Cricket for your Nat Beast, and then Mole Cricket summons itself back as soon as your opponent summons something, or especially something with higher attack, or you can just do it whenever you feel like. You can use the Mole Cricket to get access to your Sunflower and to another Camellia. Camellia will dump another thing. Basically, you're going to be set, and your opponent's going to have a really hard time off of just these Naturia cards. It feels so weird talking so much praise about an archetype that was noted as one of the worst in the entire game. Also, with really bad archetypes like Naturia and Ice Barrier having, like, stupid broken extra deck cards, and then, like, only finally being able to summon them. But yeah, so I've ranted a bit enough about it. I think I'm going to put it in the tier 2 category. I'm tempted to put it above Branded Despia. I firmly believe, especially as a smokescreen deck, because a lot of people still don't know what this does, it's going to be a very powerful deck. Not as powerful as, like, Tier, obviously, but I feel like it's another deck that can utilize the Ishizu cards very well, which is very helpful when your opponent's also playing Ishizu cards. So yeah, Naturia, Ishizu, Vernasylph, you know, Kashtira, whatever you want to call it, is going to be in the Tier 2 category. Well, guys, that's going to do it for my tier list, so I feel like this is at least kind of accurate. I feel like maybe I'm, like, putting a little bit too much doom and gloom on the format, or maybe I'm a bit inaccurate by, like, being a bit too gracious with things or a bit too negative on things, but I really feel like this format is going to be a bit frustrating for those of you that like more diverse formats, because this looks pretty diverse, but keep in mind, a lot of the things in the everything else category require a super strong pilot, and then tier 2 category is mostly just like luck. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to the Ishizu cards at all. Let me know if you are in the comments, though. I know a lot of people are very excited for the Ishizu cards, not just for anime reasons, but also because they play the decks. And I do appreciate y'all's feedback, plus it gives me a bit more engagement. But I hope you do just comment down below what you think about this list and what you think about this upcoming format, because with that out of the way, that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I always put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list that I make every single month, I'm trying to be a bit more creative with my tier list now. So I'm not only doing my competitive tier list, but I'm also doing like my hand trap tier list, my floodgate tier list. I did a spooky tier list for Halloween. If you guys didn't see, happy Halloween, by the way, because as this video goes up, if you're seeing it on the day it's posted, it is going to be Halloween, so that's really fun. I hope you guys are doing something really fun today. If not, that's cool, as long as you have fun and you're safe while you're doing it. But yeah, if you really like this content and you want to see more like it, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're on our way to 2,500 subscribers. We hit 2,000, which was awesome, but let's try to hit 2,500 by the end of the year. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.